Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to think about your exit strategy and when to start planning for it. And obviously, there's so much that goes into all of the growth and the work that you do to really get to the point of feeling like you're ready to think about what comes next. But the thing that most people overlook is that planning for your exit really needs to happen several years in advance. I think one of the most difficult situations that I see with founders or with CEOs is where they suddenly have decided that they're ready to think about the next step, but it comes at a moment where they're feeling a lot of pressure to make that next move. They're feeling really burnt out, they feel like it's time to move on, and they haven't necessarily done the thinking or the work in advance to get to that stage. So let's talk a little bit about how to think about that timeline and what it means for you. Now, again, if you've been with us for a little bit, you know that we really help organizations and their leadership teams work through these types of challenges. We talk about all sorts of different elements of growth strategy, leveling up your leadership team, and thinking about the diversification of your offerings. And as well, how do you make the best decisions for yourselves and for your teams? And a huge chunk of that comes in really thinking about what your exit plan looks like and how do you get ahead of what that means for you and your team, because it really is a massive amount of change management. It's a very personal decision to think about your exit. It can make a lot of leaders feel vulnerable. And having done the work to get there well in advance means that you'll be in the best headspace and the best business position to really capitalize on that moment and get the strongest outcome for you and for the entire team. Now, the biggest question that I often hear from founders and from C-suite leaders is, when should I exit my company? And I think that the critical thing to keep in mind here is that there really isn't any one size fits all approach. The decision around when to exit, how to exit, what type of exit you do is complex and it's highly personal for founders and leaders. But with that being said, you really create the greatest amount of optionality for you and for your future state if you start planning 3 to 5 years in advance. And at a minimum, you really want to give yourself 2 to 3 years before you put all of the wheels and mechanics in motion around your exit. That gives you time to get all of your ducks in a row and think about, what does the business need to look like financially? What does the leadership team around you need to look like? Do you have a really strong second in command? Do you have a strong business proposition? Have you thought really clearly about the narrative of your company and the growth trajectory that you've been on, as well as what the options are for the company in the future? And if you start to think about that a little bit in advance, you can also start to think about, what does life on the other side look like for you? A lot of founders will say, okay, I'm ready to make a move. I'm ready for the next thing. But they haven't really thought about what it looks like when they're not running their business day in and day out. So really being able to have a little bit of time for introspection and think about, what does next phase you look like, can also be an incredibly valuable part of the process for every leader. And then there's also that question of, how do I decide what to do? How do I determine what type of exit plan makes the most sense? Again, this is a really personal decision. It has a lot to do with the business that you've built, a lot to do with the values that you have around what comes next for the business, and what you actually think is best for the future of the business. There can be elements of really strong focus on M&A. Some are really keen to optimize their options by selling to a PE firm, either a majority sale or a minority sale, or to a strategic buyer. And some are really focused on how to diversify the ownership of the company by selling to their senior team or to selling to their employees via an ESOP. And again, the good news here is that if you plan far enough in advance, you have a lot of options open to you. You can really assess the pros and cons. You can think again about what you want your next phase to look like. Do you want to stay on in some capacity? Do you want to be a strategic advisor? Do you want to be a board member? What does all of that mean for the future state of this business? So again, the real takeaway here is that if you are a founder, if you are a C-suite leader, think about your exit plan now. Start thinking about what that transition looks like. And what is it going to require to ensure that you feel most empowered in that process and that you are in a position to create the best outcomes for yourself and for your entire team. If you have more questions about this, feel free to send me an email, drop a comment here, subscribe to our channel. My email address is Sarah, Sarah, at thenewhallgroup.com. I would love to hear from you, and I hope to talk more soon.